Okay, well, I want to thank Gerald Pollack for inviting me to speak at the conference. And we met back in 2012 where I would be speaking on the topic of zero-point energy. I've been researching this topic since the mid-70s. I've been looking at energy anomalies in the various plasma experiments and also what inventors have been doing. And I would like to share a hypothesis regarding thunderclouds, and the actual source of energy behind thunderclouds might be the zero-point energy. And if this hypothesis is correct, it could have implications for new technologies. Imagine grabbing a handful of thundercloud material, putting it into an internal combustion engine, and then subject it to a big plasma discharge, a very abrupt plasma discharge when the piston is top dead center. What happens is the piston is propelled by a surprisingly large force. How can fog particles be a fuel? After all, they're only composed of symmetrical droplets of water, and when subjected to an abrupt electric discharge, they typically just blow apart. However, if the droplet is sufficiently small, it can sometimes dimple in to form a torus form, and the plasma forms around it around that torus form to make ball lightning. Very tiny ball lightning, on the order of a micron in size. Ball lightning is basically studied. It's known to be a plasmoid. Plasmoid it's like a vortex ring of plasma. It's a natural force-free vortex. It's very stable, it has its own stability. And here's the big surprise. From the various energy anomalies associated with ball lightning, other researchers have proposed it could possibly be cohering the zero-point energy. And I'd like to illustrate a little bit about what the zero-point energy is about. John Wheeler perhaps has proposed one of the most powerful models of the vacuum when he introduced geometric dynamics back in the 1960s. And basically, the fabric of pure empty space is comprised of fluctuations of electrical field energy, where electric flux enters our three-dimensional space and through many channels at Planck length, called mini-holes, and abruptly leaves on adjacent mini-holes. So in 3 dimensions, it looks like a virtual turbulent plasma, out of which Wheeler coined the phrase quantum foam. And in Wheeler's model, basically, the flux is entering from a higher dimensional space. So this region here, labeled the flatland slot, is our 3-dimensional space. The flux enters typically incoherently. It is the background random fluctuations of the vacuum fluctuations. If there's a slight tilt to it, we say the vacuum is polarized, and we see a slight component aligning in our 3-dimensional space. If there is vorticity as the flux comes through, this could comprise the elementary particles. And Wheeler proposed a model where the zero-point energy flux is like a stream, and the particle is like a vortex. And just as the stream keeps a whirlpool going from the flow of the stream, the elementary particles sustained by the flux of the zero-point energy. Thus, in this model, that all elementary particles owe their existence to the constant flux of zero-point energy. In the turbulence of the quantum foam, or this virtual plasma, it produces electron-positron pairs. It's a big self-organizing event where these pairs appear and disappear very, very rapidly. They call them virtual particles because their lifetime is so short. But in the case of very energetic events, these particles could actually separate sufficiently to manifest as real particles in our 3-dimensional space. It turns out that the vacuum polarization description of the nucleus of an ion can trigger the self-organization in the zero-point energy by very abrupt motion. So in this model, if the ions move very abruptly, especially if they surge or jerk, they bend some of the zero-point energy flux so that it becomes a line in our three-dimensional space. And these events typically manifest in plasmas where the ions move very rapidly. They see these events as high voltage spikes, anomalous spiking of energy, and it's associated with the ion acoustic mode of a plasma. This is the proposal, is that the zero-point energy plasmoid, it's a spin of a spin. It naturally orthorotates or bends some of that zero-point energy flux into our three-dimensional space. It traps it into the plasmoid, and when it does this, it warps the space-time metric to manifest an anomalous acceleration, which would then manifest as anomalous force. So this is the hypothesis of the orthogonal flux model, which orthorotates the zero-point energy flux. And thus, ball lightning can possibly tap into the zero-point energy itself. These are self-acceleration and thus excessive force and excessive energy. So what is the evidence? There may be a little bit of circumstantial evidence in nature. Thunderclouds manifest a precursor. Every lightning strike has a ball lightning precursor that appears before the strike. We've learned this from having high-speed photography, and there's many YouTubes out on the web illustrating the ball lightning precursor that occurs before every lightning strike. However, the big energetic events occur above the thunderclouds. They include blue jets and sprites. Sprites are huge. They're approximately 50 kilometers in width and 80 kilometers in height. This is an event that occurs approximately in a millisecond. A millisecond event above the thundercloud for very big lightning strikes. And we've only learned this recently because of the high-speed photography that we are able to capture these events. And the sprite originates from the halo above. There are YouTubes up on the web that illustrates the sprite activity. And what's amazing about them is in the very high-speed photography, they saw large ball lightning type events that are emitted from the halo. They travel approximately 1/10 the speed of light, and they're approximately 10 meters in size. And the recent detection, they found out they're emitting electron-positron pairs. They're emitting antimatter. And thus, we could show that the action of the plasma in that activity is actually activating electron-positron pairs into physical existence. They detected it from the Fermi Gamma Ray Telescope. What happened was from the thundercloud activity, the emitted electron-positron pairs that got trapped on the Earth's magnetic field lines, and as the positrons hit the satellite, the annihilation with the electrons in the satellite caused a gamma ray activity, and the satellite itself became a gamma ray emitter. And then these particles would reflect off the South Pole and come back and hit the satellite again. And this is then they finally associated this activity of making the electron-positron pairs with the sprite activity above the thundercloud. There's evidence in experiments. As far back as 1907, Professor Trowbridge at Harvard noticed that the electric arc in mist, if you sprayed water mist into electrical arc, it was far louder than when the arc was struck in air. He did not know why. Professor Funkel, during World War II, studied the same phenomena and showed that the force was not due to heat or steam. He later applied it to do a sounding for reflection sounding where they could map the bottom of the ocean. This phenomenon was used to make metal, sheet metal, to form it into a mold from an abrupt discharge from the electrodes. So it's been applied shaping sheet metal. They used this phenomena of electric arc explosions in rock fragmentation. In 1969, there was a study of the energy budget, and they noticed in some of the measurements that they appeared to be over unity, one approximately 156%, and they just attributed it to some type of measurement error, and they just ignored this anomaly. Peter Grenou, a professor at MIT in the 1980s, made a career of studying explosive discharges in water, and he has measured the energy anomaly and the force anomaly. In his experiment, he has a small chamber of water with a very abrupt discharge. The discharge must be extremely abrupt in order to propel a weight up into the air. With high-speed photography, he was able to measure a plasmoid event forming in the arc. But the big surprise was he would have some big energetic events that would blow the bolts out that were supporting the container. Thus, he never did measure all the energy that was manifested in this experiment. However, Gary Johnson, a professor of electrical engineering at Kansas State University, repeated this experiment, but he designed a chamber, spherical chamber, designed to blow apart when given the abrupt electrical pulse, and then he would measure how far up guide wires the weights of the chamber, the spherical chamber, were propelled. Thus, he could measure that he had both excess force and excess energy, more than that was stored on the original capacitor creating the event. Thus, Gary Johnson proved in Grenoux's type of experiments that he truly has excess force, and excess energy. Quietly published it in the proceedings of one of the energy conferences, did not propose any theory to explain it. And thus, we have a great over-unity experiment right here for scientific replication. There's web pages discussing, can we harvest this as a practical propulsion mechanism to drive an engine? And here's a website where they explore it. The latest results from Peter Grenoux's studies were done in 2000 by the team with a high-speed photography camera. And what they found was that the anomaly was coming from micron fog particles being emitted from the water itself. And this is the source of the energetic anomaly. It was cool fog, it was supersonic, and thus he narrowed it down to the microscopic fog particles, and could those particles have been microscopic ball lightning? David Faust is a colleague of mine that I worked together with in the 70s. He recently passed away. His expertise in the 70s was corona discharge photography or curling photography. And we heard rumors that there were accidents producing small ball lightning from this apparatus. What David had was a low light level video camera, and he could repeatedly manifest it where he could see it on this low light video camera with just having water spray on the plate and subject it to a big pulse, the pulse from the apparatus. And it persisted often over a minute, and we were asking the question, were you making ball lightning? Little did we know that we were foreshadowing the discovery of this man, Ken Shoulders, who has made a career out of studying the microscopic ball lightning. What he did on his original experiments is a very sharp pointed cathode and a pulse, very abrupt pulse from a capacitor. He could launch a micron-sized ball lightning event that would travel along a dielectric and then hit the anode and produce a crater in the anode. And thus he would see the damage on that crater was very large compared to the energy that he had originally had on the capacitor. By the way, that's a beautiful patent that he wrote. He wrote it himself. It's not in legalese. I highly recommend that patent. He called these entities electron validum, or EV, that's Latin for strong charge. And when he became convinced that they were tapping into the vacuum energy, he renamed the acronym Exotic Vacuum Objects, or EVOs. They contain about 100 billion electrons, 100,000 ions. They have the charge to mass ratio like the electron, and he showed they contain excessive energy. Niadi Mesats, president of the Russian Academy of Sciences in the 90s, also studied this. He called them ectons, and he described the theory of how they're produced. This is a blow-up of the very sharp pointed cathode. Just before the emission of the EV, there's a liquid metal protuberance that sticks out into the glow plasma just around it. And the very tip of this blows off. So we have a blob of liquid metal. And the symmetry from the liquid metal allows the circulation of the plasma around it to form directly into a torus form or a plasmoid form. And this thus it goes straight into ball lightning. The key was having the liquid form that allowed the symmetry so that the vortex ring could form up. And that's the role that a very tiny droplet of water plays to launch microscopic ball lightning. It's that symmetry that was important. He detected positive EVs, and they were not comprised of positons. They would never exhibit the gamma radiation of annihilation, but they always seemed to exist in the charge-to-mass ratio like the positron. He would make pairs of them, just like pair production. And they would circulate around each other, and they would make the dual craters. He also would make what he called black EVs. They would go dormant and go dark, and then a small electric pulse could reactivate him. I believe this was what David Faust discovered. They weren't completely dark, and his low light level cameras were able to see them. This might happen in nature quite a bit. His biggest discovery for the biggest energy anomaly occurred by what he called the cascade effect. He would circulate a little vortex of water through a borehole, a very tiny hole, less than a millimeter, and when he would shoot the EV through it, there would be a coherent vortex would occur that was so powerful it would pretty well damage anything he struck. He could not discover any way to tap this energy. He used the analogy, it was like shooting a bullet at a windmill blade. And so he shared this, and he felt this was the biggest energy anomaly for the smallest amount of energy for input, just a small discharge of the capacitor to launch the EV, that produced an overly powerful effect. He was claiming the greatest over unity ratio of any experiment with this experiment. Now, there are many inventors who inadvertently discovered this. Now, I won't have time to go through and talk in detail about the inventions right now, but what I want to do is advertise my large PowerPoint, which drills into these inventions and applies this hypothesis to the inventions. And at the end of this presentation, I will share how everybody can download the PowerPoint. It's completely annotated with speaker notes, and the file stands alone to explain these details. But I'll briefly show you the type of thing that's in this PowerPoint. Of course, Dan Myers was very famous because he was claiming to run his dune buggy on water. This was his best experiment, his best device, and best invention was his last invention. Many people felt he was killed over this. It was the water fuel injector plug. And basically what he did was just inject water and ionized air into the chamber directly and then give it an abrupt pulse to drive it. And this is a Canadian patent that describes it. There are many people that play around with water electrolyzers, and they see energetic fog gas coming from them. Yul Brown was famous, and he proposed atomic hydrogen and oxygen, trying to explain why the welding torch was so powerful, even though nobody's ever measured it. And besides, at a low temperature, atomic hydrogen simply combines with whatever it contacts. So it doesn't really exist, but he could not explain the big anomalies of the welding torch, which included vaporizing tungsten, which is almost 6,000 degrees centigrade, and the temperature of the flame was very low. The flame torch itself was just a little bit above the boiling point of water. It's quite anomalous. George Weissman also studied Brown's gas. He was the first to propose there was something else in the water besides hydrogen, and he suggested some type of water structure, that maybe have a liquid crystal structure. I think what the structure is simply a very small bubble. It's the membrane of the bubble that's supporting the existence of the ball lightning. Other people have observed the cool fog coming from the electrolyzer, and when it does, it seems to be more energetic when they drive it in an internal combustion engine. There's been some video showing the churning of the mist above the bath, and if you can get the bubbles to break up and go from big bubbles to small bubbles, then you're onto a stable form that could make the microscopic ball lightning. Thus, the goal of vibrating the electrolyzers is to break the big bubbles up into tiny, stable, small bubbles, and the hydrogen helps lift the bubbles straight out of the bath, the water bath, and it's these tiny bubbles that can then convert to microscopic ball lightning. Electrosonic foggers are a good idea, and people on the web have played with it. And the idea behind narrow-gap electrolyzers, it produces lots of sputtering, lots of turbulence, and even cavitation. And they seem to get more of this energetic gas when the gaps in the electrolyzers are very narrow, typically sub-millimeter is ideal. This is an extraordinary claim. Self-running genset. It's an internal combustion engine with a generator producing the electricity which drives the electrolyzer, and they run this in a closed-loop fashion after they kick-start it. This claim is considered absolutely impossible, and that's why most people claim these folks are frauds, because not only does it take you more energy to break apart the water in the electrolyzer that you ever get back by burning it in the internal combustion engine, but it's because the internal combustion engine is so inefficient. On these generators, maybe 20% efficiency at best, you have to have a phenomena that's 500%, 5x over unity, just to close the loop on this thing because of the high inefficiency right here in the internal combustion engine. So you have losses all over the place. So it's no wonder that everyone dismisses these inventors as frauds when they make such a claim as being able to run a genset. However, if the force on the piston was due to microscopic ball lightning, you would need a lot less gas, and you could have huge anomalous force on the piston, then it just might be possible that this claim was really true. And there are inventors making the claim. Steve Eaton did so, claiming to have run this generator with just making just 6 liters of gas per minute at a reasonably small power. It's an extraordinary claim. His electrodes had a spiral on them, thus forcing the water to sputter all the way up. So his bubbles had to sputter all the way up, circulate all the way up this tube. And so there was a lot of sputtering events, and this allowed him to break any big bubbles into small bubbles. Likewise, in Germany, Aller Valentine made such a claim, working with the Antin cell, which is a very good electrolyzer with a very tiny gap. The electrolyzer was mounted on their cart, and they were claiming to run a closed-loop system on a cart, and the electrolyzer was subjected to the vibrations of the motor, and thus they made the claim. But the master of making the vibrating electrolyzer is Ryushino Masa. Masa used vibrating paddles in the water. He managed to run an engine with no air input whatsoever on it. He made an acronym that sounds like his name. Here's a video that came out in 2009 advertising his breakthrough discovery. He's a hero in Japan. In 2011, a news special came on in Japan that really promoted his device. There's his acronym, there's his fluttering blade. He ran a scooter, a car, generator. Is there an over-unity claim? 2 in, 5 kilowatt hours out? We don't know. Could not get that translated. All the information, technical information on Masa is old. The last was patent filed in 2009. On my presentation, on analyzing the patents, and I have lots of slides going into the details of the anomalies of what Masa has discovered. Basically, here's a side view of his device. Here's the vibrating blades. Here's the electrolyzer blades. There's more on the vibrating blades. They're just very flexible, and he stressed that they need to snap as they vibrate up and down. The electrolyzer plates had holes in them, up to 50%. So this is very, you would never do this if you're trying to make hydrogen, because you would want to maximize your current, thus maximize your electrode surface area. But he wanted to make sure that water got into that electrolyzer. Here's where the community on water researchers can help. He believes he's making very, very tiny nanobubbles. Submicron bubbles of water trap some hydrogen in it and they lift right out. And he is the master of making these. He has very little free hydrogen, and when he stores it under pressure, he allows the free hydrogen to vent away. So basically, he maximizes making an abundant nanobubbles or nanoscale bubbles to make the microscopic ball lightning. So I believe he has master protocol to make the breakthrough, and he wants some help. He does not understand what the structure of his water bubbles are, and that's where the water community could really help. If you want to make ball lightning, you want an abrupt, wide plasma discharge event, and so there are wide plasma discharge spark plugs that are described. I like Robert Krupa's patent. He shows that by these symmetrical electrodes, he makes a nice spherical plasma discharge. Here he dimples the cathode. And when you do that, it produces a lot of glow plasma in the gaps. So you get a very uniform glow plasma buildup just before the discharge. So he gets a very nice uniform spherical plasma discharge. This is the type of thing we want to do in the internal combustion engine. Here's a GIF illustrating the wide plasma. There are some race car spark plugs that work trying to make a bigger plasma pulse. And the Polestar plug is notable because it is built like a cylindrical capacitor. So to wrap up, basically the tiny droplets in the cloud particles can dimple into a torus form when they're small enough, which will support the plasmoid form for ball lightning. The ball lightning exhibits the self-acceleration, the cohering of the zero-point energy, and when interacting with other ball lightning and other matter in a vortex form, it can cascade to produce an even a bigger energetic anomaly. Thundercloud activity illustrates a lot of it with ball lightning precursors and the lightning, and the big activities up here in the sprites. The water arc experiments from Grenouille found that the anomaly of the water arc experiments are due to the submicron fog particles, which once again convert to microscopic ball lightning. And thus, the point of vibrating electrolyzers is to break your big bubbles into tiny, stable, small bubbles that lift right out like balloons from the electrolyzer, and these would convert to microscopic ball lightning. And any means of vibration would help. Well, Moss happened to use an unbalanced flywheel that you have the advantage. You can convert the speed of vibration by simply changing the speed on the electric motor and look for resonances in the apparatus that would launch more fog gas, for example. And then you have a way of tuning in your apparatus to do so. Well, Massa mastered it with his fluttering blades. He mastered making abundant nanobubbles with his protocol, so he is the leader and perhaps has the best device on the planet right now. Of course, you want to use a large spark plug to convert all those nanobubbles simultaneously into the ball lightning. Thus, when you do that, we convert an internal combustion engine into a pulse plasmoid engine with a huge anomalous force that essentially taps the zero-point vacuum energy as actual energy source behind propelling the piston. Thus, the Thunderclouds tap zero-point energy. We should too. Thank you. I have 3 books that I have authored on zero-point energy. They're readily available from the publisher or on the web. Just get them off the web. The Energy Machine of T. Henry Moray. Notice that the last name of the inventor matches my first name. That was quite synchronistic for me. I got the cover story article for Infinite Energy magazine on this topic back in 2012, December 2012. And this video discusses what's stopping us. What is really stopping us from making the discovery? It's really a paradigm. Can you guess what the number one thing that stops us from making the discovery? Can you just shout it out, what you think it is? Government. Well, long before the government and long before they send out the men in black to stop everybody and the oil assassins from the oil companies, the number one thing that stops us is simply belief. These ideas are unbelievable. Most people have not heard of the zero-point energy and that it could potentially be an energy source. Most academia just can't believe it. So basically, if you don't believe it, you're not going to try the experiments, and then you'll just ridicule those who do try the experiments. The number one beyond that. So this was a YouTube that I had up, and if you Google Paradigm Moray, you can get right to this YouTube where I discuss this. This is where you can download the big presentation from this website. It's completely annotated. It drills into details on the Amasa patent. And my motivation is to have everyone download this file and study it and hopefully be motivated to try some experiments and to possibly help Ryushin Amasa. I'd love to see, I understand Jerry Pollack is going to be in Japan in November at the Omoto conference. And Ryushin Amasa there's nothing on the web after 2012. Like he last spoke there in 2012, and there's been no activity ever since. So I have an assignment for Jerry. Jerry, if you're there, you can hear me. My assignment is this: it's just like Mission Impossible. And so if you choose to accept this assignment, you will contact Amasa and find out if he's been suppressed or not. And if it turns out that indeed he has been suppressed and the men in black kidnap you, Jerry, no worries, because we at the International Water Conference will treat this just like Mission Impossible and simply disavow any knowledge of your existence. So good luck. Good luck, Jerry. Well, if there's some time, I can take some questions.
We'll take a short question here.
It's Jerry. Thank you for playing with my life. So I have a question for you.
My pleasure.
Serious question. No. So we have evidence that bubbles and droplets actually bear negative charge, net negative charge, and that outside this negative charge are positive charges. So you have a natural separation of charge. We've written about this in a couple of chapters in my recent book. So when you have a fog, you've got these negatively charged particles and positive charges separated in between. So you have a lot of potential energy. Is it possible that this potential energy could be responsible for the energy output that you get when you actually convert the fog into a ball lightning?
That could easily be a component of it. But in the case of a self-running genset, because of the extraordinary over-the-top energy that's being manifested, I really believe something huge has to be occurring there for tremendous excess energy to make such a system self-running. We have to really be tapping into something else. Because remember, it's closed loop, so we're drawing a system with just our external stimulation energy. And so where's all the excess energy coming from if it really manifests? That's why a self set could be the proof. If we're easy enough to do, most would just claim that a fraud is occurring. So you would have to actually do it yourself in order to prove there's no fraud. But if the protocol could be simple enough, such a demonstration could change the world, because we would have a repeating experiment.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Moray. We have to move on with the program, but it was a very exciting talk you started out with today, so I hope that will set the tune for today. So let's thank Moray again.